Hi, everyone. Welcome to the panel. I'm going to get a moment for everyone to join. Thank you all for joining us today. Very excited that you're here. We'll give one more moment just to make sure everyone's in the room. Mario, can you give me a thumbs up once we're good to go?
We are good.
Okay, great. Well, again, thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Clayton Davenport. I use he, him pronouns. I am the Director of Development and Marketing at 1 in 10. I will be your moderator for the panel today. I'm very excited to have our panelists with us. And just a little housekeeping. If you have any questions as we're going along and we're discussing, feel free to drop them in the chat. I will be monitoring that. And then there will also be time at the end of our session to open up for the questions from the audience. Today's panel is all around what's impacting LGBTQ youth mental health. We know that LGBTQIA youth are more likely than other youth to experience mental health challenges. Studies show both internal and external factors can equally contribute to the state of our mental health. In this panel, we have several members from the community as well as professional mental health clinicians, licensed clinicians, who will be talking about the current impacts of mental health on young people today. I'm going to go around and introduce everybody real quickly. So first off, and I don't know what order it is on your screen, but I'm just going to go by my notes. We're going to start off with Nate Roten. Nate is the Chief Executive Officer for 1 in 10. Nate joined 1 in 10 in the fall of 2015, following a career of 15 years in corporate management and finance. He decided to serve the community with his nonprofit and fundraising and development expertise. Born and raised in Arizona, Nate graduated from Flagstaff High School. He then pursued a Bachelor of Science degree in economics from Arizona State University, W.P. Carey School of Business. And over the last decade, he's committed himself to a nonprofit service, serving on the Arizona Steering Committee of the Human Rights Campaign for 4 years, the board of the Greater Phoenix Gay and Lesbian Chamber of Commerce, and Melonhead Foundation, as well as the co-chair of the Board of Directors for Equality Arizona from 2012 to 2015. Thank you, Nate, for joining us today. Next up, we have Cato Stewart, Deputy Director for 1 in 10. Cato has worked for 1 in 10 for more than 14 years in various roles and served the last 3 years in their current role. Cato holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in Social Justice, Gender and Sexuality Studies. He's also an American Camp Association Certified Camp Director, supporting the team through the pandemic, developing virtual programs, and furthering our efforts to address organizational goals around race and equity and inclusion. For over 15 years ago, Cato also developed and launched Camp Outdoors, now the largest LGBTQ summer camp and program of its kind. Thank you, Cato, for being here. Third up is Aaron. Sorry, Aaron, I just butchered your name. Talavero, Director of Youth Center and Wellness. Aaron joined 1 in 10 at the start of 2022 and serves as the Director of Youth Center and Wellness. Prior to 1 in 10, Aaron worked in higher education for over 12 years, the last 5 years serving as academic and career advisement at Scottsdale Community College. Aaron has a master's in higher education and student affairs from Texas Tech University and a bachelor in sociology from University of Wisconsin Parkside. Aaron is currently finishing up his master's in educational psychology and becoming a licensed clinical mental health counselor. In 2018, Aaron created and organized a collective of gay men of color, which has grown to a network of over 500 individuals, ensuring connection to both community and resources. Thank you, Aaron, for being here. Next up is Sam Barnes. Did I say that correctly, Sam? Sam is a clinical therapist in Smallwood Behavioral, at Smallwood Behavioral. Sam is a trans and queer identified licensed associate marriage and family therapist serving communities in Arizona, Colorado, and Illinois with Smallwood Behavioral. He holds a Master of Arts in Women's, Gender, and Sexuality Studies from the University of Cincinnati and a Master of Science in Marriage and Family Therapy with a distinction from Capella University. Sam is a member of the American Association for Marriage and Family Therapy and their Queer and Trans Advocacy Network. He specializes in working with LGBTQIA+ individuals, couples, and families. Last up, we have Bianca Chaidez, lead behavioral health clinician at Southwest Center for HIV and AIDS. Bianca is a lead behavioral health clinician who works with all populations with a focus centered on trauma, LGBTQIA, Two-Spirit Plus, and BIPOC communities, depression and anxiety, neurodivergence, children, adolescents, and couples counseling. She attended Arizona State University for her undergrad and worked as a case manager for children in foster care for 4 years, with the majority of her caseload being LGBTQIA, Two-Spirit Plus youth who had little access to mental health resources. She decided to continue her education by receiving a master's in counseling with an emphasis on trauma, abuse, deprivation from Ottawa University. Thank you all for being here today. So, as we look at this, I'm going to go through and ask each of the panelists a specific question and then allow for all of the panelists at the end to add any additional comment that they want. Starting with you, Kendo. As the longest 1 in 10 staff member, could you please give us a brief history of 1 in 10, how it began, how it's evolved, where we are today, and the future of the organization as it pertains to demographics and the youth that we're currently serving?
Absolutely. Thanks, Clayton. And hi, everyone who's joining us. Very excited to be here. All of us from 1 in 10 are. So I'll give you a little history of the organization, like Clayton mentioned, and tell you about how we've evolved and what we're doing today. So 1 in 10 was founded in 1993 by a small group of community members who were really concerned and looking at ways to support LGBTQ youth. So if you think back to 1993 and a little bit about what the community landscape may have looked like, what the political landscape looked like, think about laws and how we didn't have many laws that were protecting LGBTQ folks. We were also in the kind of the end of the height of the AIDS and HIV crisis. There was a lot of support that was needed for LGBT folks. So a small group of dedicated volunteers got together and created a space that was really built out of borrowed spaces. So they met in like the Community Church of Hope. They met in borrowed conference rooms, even at a hotel at one point, to really create a safe space for young people to be able to come and be themselves. So the programs have really diversified since then at 1 in 10, but our mission's the same. So we provide social and supportive services for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, questioning, intersex, asexual, and straight allied youth plus. So even though we may not have the same direct need that we had in 1993, our young people are still coming to us for the same reasons. They're coming to build a sense of community. They're coming to find hope. They're coming to the organization to build self-esteem and to get social skills. We have a lot of different programs that encompass that, and I'm going to give you a brief overview of them. And so our downtown Phoenix Youth Center is located on Central, right off of Central, just south of McDowell. And it's open 5 to 6 days a week. And it really provides a space for young folks to be able to come in and have programming based on things that they're interested in. We really focus on being youth-centric and centering transgender, nonconforming, and gender expansive, as well as BIPOC youth in all of our programming. So a regular day at the youth center may look like young folks coming in to get resources, to access our shower, to get food, to get hygiene supplies, gender affirming clothing, from about 3 till 5 p.m. Then we have a program every night. So it may be a program that's based on specific identities, like we have a Together in Color program, we have a trans and gender nonconforming group, or it may be a program like an art night or doing Tai Chi or learning how to play drums. We have a really big mix of programming, from really that fun kind of community building programming to things that are more evidence-based, like our Sources of Strength programming that focuses on suicide prevention and intervention and building resiliency factors amongst youth. So a really wide range of programming. The Youth Center is a really great space, just about 5,000 square feet, and has a lot of different opportunities for young folks to engage. We also have our statewide satellite program. So this started probably 8 or 9 years ago with our first satellite, which was in Tempe and then Mesa. And since we've grown quite a bit, and we're actually opening our 15th satellite location right at the end of the year. And next year we'll have 18 satellite locations. And our satellite locations offer a really great opportunity for young folks throughout the state to be able to come to a 1 in 10 program, because not everybody can get to our youth center in downtown Phoenix. So our satellite sites are in a lot of different locations across the valley, such as Anthem, Chandler, Maryvale, the West Valley over in Glendale, Litchfield Park, as well as Flagstaff, Prescott, and we're opening a site in Yuma soon. One thing to know about all of our programs is that all of our programs and services are 100% free for LGBTQ youth. So one of the things we really look at is how do we reduce barriers to access, whether that's accessing our youth center, whether that's getting bus passes or transportation to access our satellites, or for example, being able to access the outdoors, like in our Camp Outdoors program and our Outscouts program. And those programs really are a youth leadership program for LGBTQ youth across the state and beyond, to be able to build community in the outdoors, but also gain leadership skills and find ways to take what they learn back to their communities. We also have a program called Promise of a New Day. LGBTQ youth make up a large percentage of the young folks who are experiencing homelessness in the country. And so we provide spaces for 18 to 24-year-olds to be able to gain access to resources around housing, whether that's working with our housing navigators to get an ID because they don't have an ID, or working to see what shelters may be available for the night, or joining our Promise of a New Day housing program, which is a rapid rehousing program for up to 1 year, where young folks who are a part of the program can actually get their own apartment and case management services and support in order to move on to independent living after a year. So we have a lot of programs and services. In addition to that, we have a workforce program that really prepares young folks to be able to get into the workforce, to build those skills, and dozens of other programs at the organization. But at the core of what we do, whether it's a workforce program, whether it's a summer camp program, it's all about building community and building spaces for youth to be able to figure out how to build those buffers and gain the tools to build those buffers in their lives, so that when they're coming up against challenges, whether it's with laws, whether it's with school, whether it's with family, whether it's community, that they have the strength and resilience to be able to work together to overcome those things. And that really directly ties back to having a healthy sense of community and tools to be able to navigate a world that there's more barriers and challenges in. And so when we come back to tie this up, kind of the mission of 1 in 10, all of these things lead to the mission of 1 in 10, which is that we enhance the lives of LGBTQ youth by providing our social programming and programs that promote self-esteem, self-expression, self-acceptance, and leadership development. So that's in a nutshell what we do. And I'll throw it back over to Clay.
Great, thank you, Kater, for that. And it's such a great example of all of the wraparound services that we provide at 1 in 10. And I think this is going to be really great intro into the discussion that we have later on with the other panelists, and really how these external factors that you're solving for are really impacting the mental health of the youth that we're serving. Housing insecurity, food insecurity, these are all contributing factors to one's mental health and well-being. Next up, my question is directed towards Nate. Nate, there seems to be an increase in anti-LGBTQ legislation being introduced nationally and locally that seems to be very intentionally directed towards the youth. As a 501c3, how does 1 in 10 work with local leaders to combat these harmful initiatives? And what support are you receiving or hearing from legislative officials?
Thanks, Clay. Yeah, to be blunt and clear, LGBTQ youth are under attack in this country, in particular in states like Florida, Texas, and Arizona. Excuse me, it makes me get emotional just even stating that, because in our great state, particularly for our trans youth, to feel this level of attack from our elected officials is not only unfair, but it's deadly. This last legislative session, we saw 12 bills introduced that were directly aimed at LGBTQ community, and several that were aimed directly at youth, and specifically trans youth. 3 of them were signed into legislation, passed by the legislature, and then signed into law by Governor Doug Ducey. First being SB 1399, allowing adoption and foster care agencies to discriminate, utilizing religious reasons against LGBTQ couples. SB 1138, banning life-saving gender-affirming surgeries for trans youth. SB 1165 prevents trans students from participating in athletics with the gender identity that they identify with. And as we look at mental health, In particular, there were several bills that fortunately did not get signed into law, one of them being proposed prison sentences for doctors providing gender affirming care to minors, which would have included something as basic as gender affirming hormones. It's these types of dangerous legislative bills that send a message to our young people that they're not accepted and they're certainly not supported. In the 2022 National Survey on LGBTQ youth mental health that is put on by the Trevor Project, they surveyed 34,000 youth ages 13 to 24 this last year. 48% were trans or non-binary, and 45% of all surveyed seriously considered attempting suicide in the past year. So if our elected officials don't think that there is an impact on our community with legislation, even if it's not signed into law, they're wrong. And what I found is, excuse me, what I found is by having conversations with people, you can make change. We were able to, through our lobbyists and community members and 1 in 10 supporters, have some really great conversations, healthy conversations with elected officials on both sides of the aisle as we were trying to defeat these proposed legislative bills. We were able to change, fortunately, SB 1138, which was the banning of life-saving gender-affirming surgeries. We were able to change that so that it didn't deal with hormones, which was a win, but we ultimately lost with it being signed into law, albeit a lesser version. But much as the LGBT community in the 90s and the early 2000s needed to come out to one person at a time, we are still at a place in society where the majority of Americans say that they do not know someone that is trans. And I think, particularly with our elected officials, for them to be creating legislation when they don't understand or know the community is dangerous. And we have to curb this nationally, but here in Arizona, we really need for our allied folks, those that are cisgender, to be contacting their legislative officials and telling them why they care about their trans friends and family, because this is the only way that we're going to educate these folks on the issues. We have a new legislature coming in, and regardless of the impact of the election, we know that 55% of our legislature this next session will be brand new to legislative service. So all of these folks from around the state will badly need education. And that is something that 1 in 10 is endeavoring to do, along with great community allies like Equality Arizona and One Community, Southwest Center for HIV, and other organizations, grouping together to tackle these issues and prevent dangerous legislation from passing this next session. I guarantee you we will see more bad bills, dangerous bills, and it's up to us to make sure that we prohibit them from becoming law. That's just a little bit about what we've done this last session. We've been fighting for a ban on conversion therapy for minors for the last 3 legislative sessions, unsuccessfully. We've introduced language that is similar to the ban that Utah passed. Every state around us has a ban on conversion therapy, except Arizona. And this sends a message, again, to our young people that they are not accepted, and they're certainly not celebrated, and that their identity is something that is wrong with them. We have to pass this ban, and I'm looking forward to working with our next governor to create an executive order to do so if the legislature refuses to do it in the next session. Thank you for the opportunity to talk a little bit about that, Clay. Obviously, these are important topics related to mental health of our young people.
Absolutely, and it really struck me too when you know your statistic or your comment about individuals who don't know or say they don't know a trans or gender expansive person. Would you mind, or either you or Kato, just maybe sharing a little bit about the identities of the youth that we're serving and seeing a shift from our inception or beginning times to with the youth populations that we're serving and their identities?
Absolutely, yes. At 1 in 10, we have seen a steady increase in the youth identifying as trans, non-binary, gender non-conforming over the years. This last year in our annual data, we found that roughly 70% of the youth we served last year identified along the trans spectrum. And this is, frankly, really exciting for me because I get this question a lot from folks, and they're like, why all of a sudden, particularly Gen Z, which are currently ages 11 to 24, identifying as trans, and then there's dangerous language out there from politicians saying that organizations are grooming young people to want to be LGBTQ. It's simply not true. These identities have always existed, going back hundreds, if not thousands of years. It's just now we have community and language to represent these folks and their identities. And I think that's a really powerful thing. No longer do you have to just select from the straight or LGB box. There's so many other wonderful identities out there. And if we can allow someone to select and identify in the identity that is closest to them, it is so powerful for their mental health, reduces rates of depression, suicide, and all other sorts of health factors. And even if someone doesn't agree with it, why wouldn't you want someone to just be their happiest, best self? It's a basic human right. And so I'm excited to see this transition and transform in our country, and look forward to hopefully seeing a greater level of support nationally and in our state.
Excellent. Well, thank you. I also wanted to remind all the panelists that if you had additional comments that you wanted to add in or, supplement in here too, please feel free to unmute yourself. I saw a couple of you kind of nodding your head as Nate was speaking and stuff. And so this conversation is meant to be open for all of us, a real discussion on the topic. So please feel free to unmute yourself at any time. You don't have to follow the script that I sent over earlier to all of you. So. So moving on, I'd like to direct this next question towards Erin. Erin, as the director of wellness and the youth center here at 1 in 10, can you provide a little more information? I mean, obviously these young people don't live in a vacuum, right? They're seeing, the news, the legislative outlets. I can personally say that I'm always so impressed on the youth's knowledge, and especially the younger youth's knowledge about just legislative initiatives, about discriminatory actions being had, and just really coming together as a community. But could you just maybe expand a little bit on the programs offered at 1 in 10, specifically around like our sources of strength, and some of the comments or concerns that you're hearing from the young people, and how these programs are helping support their needs?
Certainly, Clay. Before I jump into the details, I'll share a little story from Camp Outdoors this summer. So I had the opportunity to be a cabin counselor at our awesome Camp Outdoors annual event or annual program, and I was a camp counselor for 11 to 13-year-olds. And during that, so at night we would have, obviously 11 to 13-year-olds were a little bit restless. They had fun, awesome days, and they didn't want to go to bed. So one of the things my campers were doing was telling ghost stories or scary stories, as you would do at camp. And I was, we let them pass kind of like a baton, so everyone could participate in telling a ghost story. And the main, I would say, like character, or I guess source of evil that came up in these ghost stories was the Supreme Court and the different legislation. And so they even used certain politicians that signed these bills, and those were the people that were scary. So they weren't even using ghosts or folklore, they were using actual people. So that gives that can attest a little bit to the age range and how informed they are, and how it impacts their everyday life, and whether they discuss it with parents or they see it at school, things of that nature. They are very informed and very aware. To dive a little deeper into some of the programs that Cato shared earlier, such as Sources of Strength. Sources of Strength, really, as Cato mentioned, is we speak from a resiliency point. So the ideal is we know that LGBTQIA plus youth are more likely to either attempt suicide or even sometimes complete it. And so really we speak from a place of resiliency, and it's the wheel has 8 wellness factors ranging from like mentorship, positive friends, trusted adults, things of that nature, everything down to really healthy activities. So that includes really sitting down with the youth and talking to them about everyday things that are in their lives that they might not see as resources that will that are things that they can tap into when they're feeling anxiety, when they're feeling if they happen to feel depression, if they're things of that nature. And so what we do is me and a wellness specialist and some other staff members who have been trained, we put on a series of these programs that intentionally engage youth at all ages. So starting as young as 11, and we have conversations with them, invoking them to speak to whether we're having them in activities or whether we're talking to them and just discussion and having them share their everyday. Do they have a teacher? Do they have a coach? Do they have a music instructor that they feel like if they ever feel down, if they ever feel alone, or if they happen to experience bullying, do they have someone to go to? Because a lot of times these youth, they don't realize the tools that are at their fingertips. So if they don't, so part of SOS or kind of the main point is to remind them of those everyday resources they do have. And a lot of them who can't speak to something on the wheel, like say they some don't understand mental health as of yet. We can speak to mental health, not in the form that it has to be a therapist, but other things, mindfulness, and whether that's journaling, whether that's if they know what affirmations are, and kind of starting them and meeting them where they are. So that's one of the important ways that, or important things that we really try to emphasize. We have programming from 11 to 24 years of age. So we want to make it very age appropriate. So we know that we can't have the same conversations necessarily with 11 to 13 as we're having with those who may be 16, 17, and even our 18 to 24. And they're all at different places in their life. And ultimately, the youth center is a safe space. Like at the end of the day, it's really a safe space for our youth and young adults. A lot of times on a day-to-day basis, and just the youth dropping by, we'll have conversations with them where they're sharing about a GSA being taken away at their school or being bullied at their school and how their school responded to it. And they don't feel safe at school, unfortunately. And this is a place where they spend most of their day, where they're supposed to be there, developing and getting educated and becoming their higher self. And that is being restricted because of the environment and not being as conducive or healthy or affirming and celebratory of our youth. And so in addition to SOS, we do have a series called Sex FYI, which once again, we do at an age appropriate delivery, whether they are, younger and we're just we start off with self-esteem and identity and things of that nature, or we're talking about actual to the point where we do with older youth and young adults, when we're talking about HIV and the stigma around HIV and STI prevention and or treatment. We have a lot of partnerships with Gilead or Southwest Center, where we are able to bring these resources in and supplement the education we're giving them with direct resources so they can meet people and they don't feel alienated if they have a question about something. And we normalize a lot of the things that maybe in school are not being discussed or based on their gender identity or their sexuality is not being delivered properly, because we know a lot of it is very heteronormative, and it is and there might be shame associated with being a part of our community and talking about any of these things. In addition to just connecting them with regular resources, a big thing that I've been doing in my time here is making sure that anyone that I reach out to bring in the space that has to do with mental health, they are culturally competent, that they are going to understand not only to work with those youth who identify as LGBTQIA, but that they also are understanding the intersectionalities about race, gender, sexuality, even spirituality and beliefs, because a lot of people don't understand that a lot of youth and young adults still hold on to their belief systems, and they just define it for themselves. Even though they are part of this community, that doesn't get taken away. And so we help them navigate that as well. Those are some of the programs that we really emphasize here that have to do with wellness and things of that nature. In addition, we bring resources such as the Phoenix Children's Hospital Med Van. We bring the dental van because we know a lot of our youth or young adults who are entering in that age who happen to be experiencing homelessness and things of that nature. They might not have access to insurance right now or adequate healthcare or regular healthcare. Sometimes it's their first time getting a physical, coming here and realizing we have the resource here. And so we really try to emphasize wellness of the whole individual through a lot of our programming, the resources we bring, and just the space that we provide.
That's great. And I think it's so important to spotlight the real intersectionality of it, right? Like, I mean, it's so funny just to go back to like Nate said, like these boxes, right? Like they're just such defined boxes that we're all put into, and it's like they overlap. It's a Venn diagram, never just like a square box that we can be shoved into. So we do have some really great questions that are popping up in the chat, and I'm going to actually open these up to anyone on the panel who'd like to unmute themselves. But the first question comes in and it says, what can parents do to help their kids deal with homo, bi, transphobia coming from outside the home? Would anyone like to take that? Aaron, I saw you unmute.
So I would say one awesome thing, program or source that we have is Parents Group, and I understand we're speaking to the youth, but I think parents being more educated and having a direct resource and a place to feel supported and get more resources directly. But I think another thing is, as parents are educated on the programs and the sources that we provide or the resources we provide, then they will be more apt to connect their youth here so that the youth can be involved in sources of strength. The youth can be involved and advocated for themselves and speaking to school officials and things of that nature, because a lot of times they just, they're fearing retaliation.
Great, thank you. And I'm going to put in there, always you can find more additional resources at 1in10.org. So you can always check out our website for more information on that too. The second question that came in, I have a family who are teachers and don't have the training or understanding of their trans kids in class or how to help the youth. Is there anyone they can contact for more information? Cato?
I can speak to that on kind of 1in10's behalf and what we do, but I'd love to give opportunity for others in the space as well. So I'll briefly do that. So we have a training program at 1in10, which really focuses on connecting with all kinds of different organizations, from community-based organizations to businesses, to schools, to the federal government. And what we do is we create customized trainings for folks around the LGBTQ community. So it's an opportunity, and we've trained several different schools and things as well, but it's an opportunity for folks to have their staff or stakeholders in their community, organization, or business understand more about the LGBT community and the importance of the community, as well as language, because I can tell you, working at 1in10 for as long as I have, that I'm learning something new every day. I ran a program in Anthem last night for our satellite, and I learned new language yesterday. So our language is always evolving and changing, and the community is always evolving and changing. So even if folks identify within the LGBTQ community or have, identify as an ally, there's always opportunities. So from the 1in10 perspective, definitely reach out to us if you're looking for a training. We're also going to soon be doing some community trainings where folks can, including parents and family members, can drop in into the youth center to be a part of our trainings as well.
That's great. So again, follow us on social and always visit our website for up-to-date information on that. I'm gonna shift over to our supportive side of the panel, and I'm gonna first talk to Bianca. I'd like to just ask you specifically, can you provide some of the common reasons that you are seeing that LGBTQ youth reaching out to you? And are there any significant external factors that are really impacting their mental health of the clients that you're serving?
Yes, so some common reasons I have LGBTQ plus youth reaching out to me have been things like youth needing help managing symptoms like anxiety, depression, up to ADHD and autism. So we kind of help with managing those symptoms, learning coping skills, grounding techniques. I help them get like IEPs or 504 plans. So kind of helping with bridge that gap for school. We do some processing with, they come for guidance around processing their gender or sexual identity. And we have been able to provide a safe place for them to be themselves through therapy. Some of my clients have come to me trying to work on their self-esteem or confidence. Others come to therapy trying to learn how to be more accepting of things that are out of their control, like if their parents are separating or if they have grief and loss. As Erin kind of mentioned earlier, there are many in the community who have attempted suicide or even completed it. Many of these youth have known one of these children. So they are dealing with that, and how do they kind of cope with that if they also have depression and anxiety? So we kind of address, okay, like how do we manage that on that level? And unfortunately, a big reality is that many of my kiddos would like to process trauma that they have. So bullying is a huge one, sexual assault, sexual abuse, intimate partner violence, homelessness, neglect, physical abuse that they have endured. And I would like to think that I create a safe and inclusive space for these realities to be explored. And some ways that I do this is through EMDR. So I am EMDR certified. We do art therapy, we do music therapy, in addition to just regular talk therapy. Are there significant external factors impacting mental health of the clients I serve? Absolutely, and terrible. The youth are extremely smart. Like, if people try to say kids are not smart, I'm like, you guys are dumb, because kids are probably the smartest people alive. They have the internet at their fingertips. They know exactly how to find information like that, which is great and can be a good thing, but at the same time can be very toxic. And I feel like the youth are fully aware that we live in a state that is literally hurting them, outing them, and actively putting practice laws that are detrimental to our LGBTQIA community as a whole. Kind of like Nate was saying earlier, in the past year, our governor has signed Senate Bill 1138, which bans medical care for our trans youth. Senate Bill 1165, which prevents trans students from participating in basically sports. Sorry, I'm getting choked up. This is really fires me up. In sports that they identify with, or their gender that they identify with. House Bill 2161, which makes it illegal for government employee to withhold information that is relevant to the physical, emotional, and mental health of a parent's child, and specifically prevents teachers from withholding information of a student's purported gender identity and requests to transition to a gender other than the student's biological sex. And basically that is just outing them to the parent under the guise of protection and under law. And I bring these 3 ones specifically up because these are the ones that my children have kind of brought up to me in session. And these are the ones that really impact them and really hurt them. They have definitely talked about them, and it weighs on their mind. They are very much stressed about it. They live their life anxious, that, hey, they're like, they know these laws by heart pretty much, because they're like, hey, this is the stuff that is literally putting me and my friends in literal physical and emotional danger. And these stressors follow them throughout their week, building up over time. And thankfully, we could work together to process some of these factors. But I don't have all of these kids. Like, I have a small little handful of them. And yes, they can kind of help by maybe like them sharing this information by word of mouth. But, it's very limited. And I mean, realistically, think about it, how hard it must be to breathe when you feel like the world is against you and you have to be careful of even being yourself. My clients are constantly dealing with both microaggressions and other immediately threatening realities around their identities. That could be around their race, gender, sexuality, and things that weigh heavily on their mental health. I was going to end there, but as a therapist, I have to reframe, and I'm going to pull out some positives because, that's what we do.
I love it. Keep going.
And I know, I'm like, here I am being a therapist, but I want to also put out there that there are some other external factors that I may have missed when I first read this question and thought about it, because I was so fired up and I was like, oh, I need to just fight for these kids. We are the huge external factor. Like, we are doing the work. So LGBTQ youth mental health is also being impacted by what we do. Us, the allies, our organizations, 1 in 10, Southwest Center, other therapists who are actively trying to do good and be there for the youth, legislators who are actively trying to push forward, good stuff for our LGBTQIA folks. So yes, there are some things that are bad, and we can always see that, but I am going to try and focus on what I can do. And as one of my kiddos kind of mentioned to me, they shared within the last kind of week that one of their teachers came up to them and in front of the whole class was like, hey, I am non-binary. I am choosing to go by they, them now. If anybody would like to change their pronouns and they don't feel comfortable saying it in front of the full class, they can just email me or write a note or just put their pronouns on their papers, their homework. And I will do my best to change that for you. Now, I'd like to think that this teacher is not going to go and out them to their parents. I'd like to think that they are wholeheartedly trying to give a safe place for this kiddo, and putting themselves in the line of fire to give this youth a chance to be themselves. And that makes me proud, and that makes me happy that there are people like us that are trying to make change and ruffle some feathers. And hell yeah, let us do the fight and make change and make waves. And so yes, there are things that externally are impacting in a negative way, but we can also push back and make external factors in a positive change for some of these kids, because I have seen some good things for them. I've had older clients tell me like, hey, I'm so glad that you are seeing younger kids. Like, some of my youngest clients are 6 or 7 years old. And they're like, if my parents would have brought me to therapy at 6 or 7, I would not have the problems I have today, or I wouldn't have felt the way that I did. I'm so glad that they are so loved, or their parents are so accepting that they are giving them the help that they need. And yes, that is something very small and something very different. It's a different mindset change, but change starts with that. It's one day at a time, one step at a time. So that's all I got to say. Thank you for listening to me. And I appreciate you guys inviting me to this panel.
No, Bianca, thank you. That was just so powerful and just so important for you to share. And I really appreciate the work that you're doing and truly the lives that you're saving. And it really is. It does come down to that. Now, I just kind of a follow up too. Are you seeing, a lot of the LGBTQ community, relies on kind of word of mouth, right? Like, we trust each other and we trust, this
Yes.
This goes into the businesses that we frequent. This goes into the accommodations that we reach out to and stuff like that. Are you seeing, kind of a referral process happening through the
Yes,
clients that you're serving? Okay.
I actually am. So initially, I think there was just kind of, it was maybe children of clients that were already here at Southwest Center that were kind of like, hey, you're opening up to children. Like, hey, I have maybe a child, or I know people who would like children services. And then they kind of like spread out. And then eventually, like, I have kids from Flagstaff that remote in, so I do telemed with them. And then just word of mouth. Like I have some kids who have told their friends and vice versa, just like bloop, bloop, bloop. And gets kind of sticky because I have to be like, hey, I have to like blinders up. Like, I don't know who you guys know. You know, you guys can't name drop. I will never name drop. But they're like, no, but you're a safe person. And like in this community, we need safe people. So, I mean, that's kind of like the weird little balance that I do. And I'm like, hey, not every therapist is comfortable with that, but I understand that, hey, safety is first. And so my thing is a little bit different. So it is very much a word of mouth type of thing. But I definitely have had some kids be like, oh yeah, you know this one person and they're the ones that told me. And I'm like, you should not have told me that. And I'm like, I did not hear that. And they're just like, oh yeah, I'm not supposed to tell you that. And I'm like, okay. So it's very cute and very funny. But they're like, oh yeah, you're not supposed to know that I know so and so and so and so. And I'm like, no, but we'll just pretend that never happened. And they're like, what happens in therapy stays in therapy, right? And I'm like, yes. So it's a very fun and kind of weird process, but definitely is a word of mouth type of thing. And I think it definitely helps because once you kind of get the buy-in from one kid, it's very easy that like you get more referrals that way because they're like, okay, yeah, you got thumb of approval versus like just being kind of somebody that they're like, well, are you sure you do this good? So I get it. I understand why we need to do that.
So thank you, Bianca, for that. I want to hear from Sam. Sam, you've been kind of quiet, you know. So I'm gonna shift over to you, and kind of similar along the same lines, but as a marriage and family therapist, I'm gonna try to throw a couple things at you real quick. Are you seeing any trends are you recognizing any trends in the LGBTQ youth and the clients that you work with? And like, are you seeing any noticeable shifts in the age? I know I think it was Bianca just mentioned as the younger and younger youth that are coming in. And then really also, I just want to follow up too with that is like, how does the family support dynamic, really impact the youth mental health of these young people?
Yeah, so those are good questions. So I guess I'll kind of start with some of the trends that I've been seeing. Like Bianca, I see a lot of LGBTQ youth for depression and anxiety in particular. A lot of the youth that I see are coming directly out of inpatient programs where there's been a suicide attempt. So a lot of them are really struggling with severe depression, and a lot of it's also loneliness and lack of community and feeling kind of like they're by themselves. And families can be super supportive, but without a peer network, they often feel kind of unmoored. And so that's kind of a lot of what I've been seeing lately with youth. I've been seeing an interesting trend in families in particular, where a few years ago, families were kind of this big kind of area of turmoil for kids. And what I've been seeing lately is the shift in families towards being more supportive, even if they don't quite understand, even if they don't really know what's going on for their youth, what they're experiencing when it comes to discrimination and microaggressions. And then I end up seeing families who are just completely confused. They're really upset that their youth isn't being treated the same way as their cisgender and straight peers. And I see families who are really struggling in systems who are not designed to accommodate families who have LGBTQ youth in their system. And so what we're seeing is a lot of confusion, a lot of stress in families as well as they're trying to cope with a lot of this discriminatory legislation, a lot of misunderstanding among schools, medical providers, even other mental health providers. I get a lot of folks who come to me after being with other mental health providers who just don't understand the struggles these youth and their families are going through. And so the kind of the big trend that gave me a little hope and that, Bianca kind of mentioned a little bit as well is seeing these other good things that are happening in the community, starting to have a little bit of a cultural impact, especially for families, is seeing, that families are shifting to a more supportive standpoint, which is a big impact on youth mental health. I am seeing clients younger and younger. Before, I mean, even a few years ago, I was mostly seeing people in their early 20s, late teens. Now I have, my youngest client is 11. That's as low as our clinic accepts. But, I have a trans kid who's 11, and I was like, oh, this is awesome. Like, good for you. You know who you are. He's, very engaged with living his life how he wants, and his family is doing their best to support him. On the other hand, I have an 85-year-old client who's like, this is not what my youth was like. He's like, this is awesome. I'm so happy for the youth in our community, and, that they don't have to struggle the way I did. And so it's kind of seeing that dichotomy as well, as the culture has shifted a lot over the last few years, where kids are able to express themselves, their families are safer, they're able to really be able to figure out who they are young and express that to the important people in their lives. And that's one of the biggest trends that I've been seeing lately, and that gives me a lot of hope for the future and for these kids, is that the family culture is also changing. I would have to say, in my opinion, as a marriage and family therapist, that families are probably one of the most important factors when it comes to the mental health of youth in general, but especially for LGBTQ youth. I know we talked a little bit about, resources and stuff for families, and families being a safe space is probably one of the biggest factors in keeping kids from committing suicide, from being homeless, from experiencing addiction and other mental health problems. Families are a very big protective factor. I would also say that community is a very big protective factor. I've worked with youth who have, created their own kind of what we call alternative kinship networks, where maybe their family hasn't been supported, and they lost their family, or they had some sort of traumatic loss, and they're kind of drifting through life without a family. They find community and they create their own type of family network. Those family networks are just as important as blood related family, because they offer these protective factors, these factors in which kids have a place to go, where they have a safe center of operation. And that's why these community spaces are just as important as the family home. And having those spaces mesh is also really important. Families also need additional support. And, like we kind of mentioned earlier, a lot of these families maybe don't know how to best support their youth. They don't know what resources are out there. And so spaces like 1 in 10 are incredibly important for helping these families remain supportive and remain safe spaces for their children. And so a lot of what I've been seeing is families who want to do it. They maybe don't have the resources. Once we give them the resources, they're able to be better educated, better safe spaces for their youth. And that helps create some of these protective factors that help keep our youth alive, and help them thrive. And just to kind of, mention the legislation and pieces as well. I was kind of thinking, as everybody was talking about some of this stuff, our youth pay attention. They do, like Bianca said, they're incredibly smart. They know these things are happening, and they're watching the adults around them and how they respond. And so, when some of this legislation and stuff comes up, how the family responds is really important. We're looking for responses of empathy and validation, and I understand that you're hurting. How can we get involved? How can we create change as a family? Even if it's just within, our own family network, or, who we have in our family life. Those things are incredibly important, because our youth pay attention, and they notice who supports them and who does not. And they make decisions based on that, and that impacts their mental health. When you're constantly having to choose who's safe and who's not, that's a lot of stress, and it can trigger a lot of anxiety and a lot of depression. And so creating some of these safer spaces with safer people is really important, and they notice who's safe and who's not.
No, thank you for that. And I think you hit on so many points as I was listening to you, talk and especially, I think we've all, also multiple times throughout the conversation said, the youth are smart, the youth are aware, they know, and sometimes I feel like the adults in the room making the decision are solving for a problem that doesn't exist, right? And when you really take it back to the youth, who are the ones that are impacted by this, and get their voices and listen to what they have to say about the situation, I think you'd get probably a different answer sometimes from those young people compared to the adults in the room. This goes into a question that we have in the chat, and it says, how do you recommend talking to elementary age children about gender identity? Do you find they grasp the concept? We're seeing more gender neutral bathrooms in elementary schools in my area, hooray. But parents are expressing concerns about having the conversation with their young children and kids. And that really is open up to anybody on the panel. So, but maybe Sam or Bianca.
So in my experience, I've actually never really had a child not understand. I think it's very easy for them if you kind of put it in very just basic terms. Keep it very kind of neutral. I think a lot of times we get more embarrassed ourselves as adults. Like we're like, how are we going to explain this? Kids are very, very intelligent, and they'll pick up on your feelings about it. So if you're nervous about it, they're going to be nervous about it. And a lot of times if you kind of just put it down like, hey, this is the terminology, this is the basics, a lot of times they kind of sponge that up. A very good diagram, and it's kind of basic, is the gingerbread man. It is a very clear cut like thing. You can actually Google it. It kind of breaks down sexuality, gender identity, and it puts it in like nice little terms in a little gingerbread man. It's a very easy kind of like one-page paper-ish. You guys can kind of just, like I said, Google it, and I've actually used that with kiddos. I've even had like my 6 or 7-year-old clients like be like, hey, did you look at this? Because clearly I think you messed up here. You totally said this wrong. And they've like schooled me on stuff, and I'm like, oh, I'm sorry. Like I totally messed up about this. And they'll call me out on it. If I mess up on any pronoun or something.
I'm right there with you. I've experienced the same thing. So
oh yeah,
young people
they're
keep us in
very
check.
astute. They'll pick it up very quickly. So I think it's more on like making sure that you kind of just get the information, relay that, but also it's on how you deliver it. Because like I said, if you are nervous in any way or are kind of like hesitant, kids will pick that up, and they will definitely be like, well, I don't know about this, because if my mom or dad doesn't feel comfortable, that's going to also kind of come out in how they relay that information or interpret it. And
That's great.
I may have something different.
That's great that you mentioned that, because I was going to actually pose that too as a follow-up, as does that conversation really start with the education of the parents, right? Like if the parents are asking, well, how do I explain this to my child? Is that, in a way of them saying that they need help understanding it themselves?
I think too, Clay, that it's just important to, as a parent, and I'm admittedly not a parent, but I have a niece and nephew that are 8 and 12, and it's important as an adult in their life that they know that I'm open to talking about this. I don't have all the answers, but my nephew, when he was 3, came to me and he was like, Uncle Nate, when do I have to decide if I'm gay or straight? And I was like, Griffin, you can decide at any time, but you'll just know. Don't worry about it. And he was like, oh, okay. And he was like, I don't know what I'm going to be, And I'm like, just give it time and it'll come to you. And you do what feels right to you. And when you're ready, come back and ask me questions. And I just think that's important, that young people know that the adults in their life are open to having the conversation and just being honest. Like, I don't understand about that. Let me look into it and we'll read about it together. Something like that.
And I also am a big fan of the positive reframe, Bianca. So I always appreciate that lens. And, you know, one of the things I think about through these conversations, you know, aside from all of the challenges, is what an exciting time for us to be able to have these conversations with young folks about exploring identity, right? And not having to make decisions. And even the fact that, you know, we have 3-year-olds who are saying terms like gay or trans or, you know, things like that, when if you think 10, 15 years ago, those were not terms that could be said in most households, right? And still today, of course, can't be in many. But we're seeing, you know, because of what the community has done in the past 50 to the beginning of time, really, you know, how far we've come, we can look and see how things have evolved and changed. So although we are continuing to hit roadblocks, and frankly, you know, if we think about our organization as 1 in 10, you know, we have folks coming out calling us again at 6, 7 years old, right? 11 years old. Whereas one of the questions I get asked a lot is, well, isn't it so much easier today for LGBT youth than it was, you know, 20 years ago or 30 years ago? And my answer is always that it's just different, right? I can't say it's harder or it's easier, but if you think about the fact at which the statistics at which many young people are coming out, a lot of young people are coming out, or at least kind of coming to terms with figuring out their own identity under the age of 18. Whereas maybe 15, 20 years ago, folks a lot of times weren't coming out until they were over 18. So when you're thinking about having personal autonomy and being able to navigate your world, if you're coming out in a home or a community system or a spiritual religious system that is not affirming of your identity, you just have different barriers that you're facing. There's also different positives to that, right? Of having potentially more community, more places to go to, having even mental health professionals and counselors that are saying, hey, it's okay to figure out who you are and to explore your identities. When we know, you know, in the 60s up to the 70s, you could actually be put in, yeah, somewhere you didn't want to be for that, right? So we have come a long way as a community, but we continue to face barriers. But one thing I know from working with our youth pretty much every day is that they are incredibly resilient. And if we can build those, you know, resiliency factors, help them figure out the tools and have ideally supportive families and supportive communities, but at least one person in their life who's a trusted adult, right? We know as folks who work in these realms that having a trusted adult and someone to talk to is going to greatly reduce your risk of self-harm, depression, suicide, things like that.
Yeah, I would echo some of what was said, especially in regards to if we think about it, when the question about changing bathrooms at elementary schools to gender neutral, when these children are at home, they don't have specific bathrooms that they're going to. It starts in the home. It starts, as Bianca spoke to, the energy, the reaction, kind of how the parent is speaking to gender early on, how they're normalizing if a young child that identifies as a boy chooses to wear a dress and not limiting them. So a lot of it does start with the education of the parent, and the parent being comfortable with what could be or just what is. And I think parent education, psychoeducation, as Sam spoke to, where the parents who are curious and not judgmental, or and understanding and supporting and celebrating their youth, their children, just being an active part in the learning, and even having the humility to maybe correct themselves in the house if they say something, or if someone else says something around them, to normalize, so that when these youth go out into the world, whether it's at school or wherever have you, if there is something like a gender neutral bathroom and something, it's not a big deal. It's really normalized, because once again, at home, I'm sure we don't separate bathrooms unless the parents have their own bathroom, of course, or something like that.
Thank you, Aaron. So there are some really great questions coming up in the chat, which it makes my job much easier. So I really appreciate this. So there's, I'm not sure if it's a question, but just if all the panelists can see the chat, there's a really great kind of kudos to all of you. Thank you. Love all the focus on the youth. Aaron mentioned the educating parents and connecting youth to focus on their health historically. Cato talked about building buffers and helping youth gain tools, help community, and Nate talked about having the language and working towards basic human rights for what will work for all. Thank you, Bianca and Sam, for your passion in helping youth grow strong adults. Excellent work on creating safe spaces. But I want to get to the actual question that came next. As healthcare and social service providers, how can we express the needs of our LGBTQ plus community and youth to other providers who don't have experience working with us or who are not as LGBTQ friendly or inclusive? I think this touches on a really great topic about core competency in our providers around LGBTQ individuals. Would Sam or Bianca want to take that one? I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but you know.
I guess I can speak to this a little bit because I've run into this with some other folks in the mental health care community. And part of it is just reminding them that even if you don't think that you have an LGBTQ person on your caseload or in your practice, you probably do, and they just don't feel comfortable talking to you about it. And that's a problem. You can't provide the best care if you don't know what risk factors are impacting this person. What microaggressions are they facing? What barriers are in their way? How can you remove those barriers? And that's, prompted some interesting discussions about what kind of education should be provided to folks who are in, some of these medical settings, some of these service settings, some of these mental health settings, and kind of in a way requiring some work on gender and sexuality so that providers can better provide. Our job is to be here to help people, live their best lives. And we can't do that if we're not able to engage with folks around every aspect of who they are as a person. And if we can't provide the support that they need. And we can't do that if we've got blinders on and are just kind of, charging down the road with this very kind of singular identity in mind. And so, I encourage just having conversations with folks, reminding them that, hey, if you're not aware of these things, the people you're interacting with are aware that you're not aware of these things. We pick up on those signals. And so, in order to better provide care, we need to have these conversations, and folks need to have the educational opportunities to be educated so they can better do their jobs. We can't provide best care if we are completely ignoring a certain population. And so, having those open conversations with folks is really important. It can just be, a nice conversation. It doesn't have to be anything super big, but even just opening the door and being like, okay, hey, like I noticed, that maybe this was a microaggression, or, for instance, I have, a trans young person who went to a gynecological office and they were playing Fox News in the waiting room, and Fox News was going on a tirade about, LGBTQ stuff and, spouting a lot of discriminatory stuff. And that made them very uncomfortable. They almost left. The problem is that microaggression can prevent someone from getting the care they need. And so even something small like that can be an inroad to a conversation about how do we make not just you a better provider so that folks can come to you for needed care, but how do we make your space more supportive of all folks who are coming to you for care?
Thank you, Sam, for that input. And, and I also think it also, translates back into, the coverage for care too, right? I'm fortunate enough to have insurance coverage, right? And I also remember a time when my insurance coverage gave me a list of providers, and that didn't tell me anything about them, but it was, these are the providers in the network. And it wasn't until I showed up to that office where I could really get a full understanding myself about, how inclusive the office was, or what this, the provider. And I think that, could lead to potential, lack of treatment that, specific to my needs too. So, insurance companies being, a part of it too, and the continuing of care. So thank you for that. Next up, this is really more of a thought. Oh, Bianca, yes.
So just real quick, kind of going with Sam, I also have therapist friends that are not at a center that is kind of geared toward LGBTQ. And we do have these conversations quite frequently where I'm like, okay, what are you doing that is kind of making yourself inclusive? Because they do say like, oh, well, I am LGBTQIA friendly. And they do put that as like a thing on their, bios and stuff like that. And I'm like, well, okay, put your money where your mouth is. Like, how are you doing this? And they're always like, dang, Bianca, you're vicious. And I'm like, well, yeah, this is a population that is very dear to my heart. Like, what are you actually doing? And like in having these conversations where like I've kind of maybe been a little bit more direct, and they have been very gracious about it because we've been more on the friendly side where I can be like, hey, like, what are you actually doing? They're like, oh, I actually am not doing as much as I think I am. So like after we had those conversations, they actually started putting up flags around their office. They started asking clients like, what are your pronouns? They started putting on the intakes like, hey, please identify yourself or your, things like that. And stuff as simple as that they were like, hey, I am LGBTQIA friendly. I do support this, the cause. I have never been or felt like I am discriminatory, yet they weren't doing the stuff that is like the bare minimum. And it wasn't until we had those conversations that they were like, crap, I haven't been doing this. And that's not to say that like they're bad people or, they probably just didn't even think about it. But that's where these conversations need to happen, is that we need to be talking about this. We need to have, some dialogue about, hey, this is what needs to happen to make our community feel seen, feel heard, feel like they have a place in these spaces. It's not just saying like, okay, during Pride Month, yeah, we have flags and we are totally part of, inclusive. It needs to show up the other 11 months of the year. So little steps like that, little dialogues here and there, actually having those conversations to make sure that like, hey, there is representation. And it starts with as simple as like, hey, hello, how are you? What are your pronouns? Things like that can go a long way for making somebody, as a simple microaggression of like the TV, that is huge. I honestly would have felt uncomfortable too. I would have been like, oh yeah, I don't know about this. Because realistically, those are the type of things that stay with you. They make you uneasy and they make you feel not safe. And safety is first and foremost. And that's the type of stuff that we need to make sure that people who are not in this community understand that providers need to really think about. So thank you.
Thank you for that. So as we shift to the next, kind of question, it's more of a topic and a discussion option for everybody. But someone asked, can you help me understand how to counter arguments against transgender athletes competing in programs, setting records, etc., when they argue that while they have no issue with anyone determining their own gender identity, they argue that it should not impact record books, etc. I appreciate your thoughts and assistance on this. Feels like it's difficult.
I have a lot of thoughts on this. I don't think I'll want to get into all of them, particularly here, but there are a lot of really good resources, specifically through like the Human Rights Campaign, that really talk about this particular, this particular question and issue. And it's a conversation that I can say that I've had with a lot of folks that are close to me in my life. And what I would like to share just in this space, so I don't go down a total rabbit hole on it, is that these bills have been designed to attack and target trans folks, right? So when we look at Arizona specifically, what I like to do is bring the conversation away from what often becomes the one example, which is, an Olympian or an extreme really great athlete, right? And I bring it back to what is the reality of how this is impacting trans and gender nonconforming students and youth in our state. And I can tell you from being a part of, standing against and speaking against many of the bills that were in the legislature this past session, we had a 13-year-old trans-identified girl who was missing school on a regular basis to have to come to the state capitol to stand in front of legislators that were basically saying she shouldn't be allowed to play sports, and saying that she shouldn't be allowed to have gender affirming surgeries, and saying that she shouldn't basically be allowed to exist, right? And those are the kind of bills that are targeting our young folks. And so the trans athlete bills are really just, in my opinion, the new focus of folks trying to control and regulate specifically trans folks, like myself, I identify as trans, and our bodies, right? And so when I'm having those conversations, I often bring it back to the importance of sports and what that can play in people's lives, right? Like myself as a young person, if I was able to be on a sports team that I think would have been a better fit for me, that probably would have had a lot of really great outcomes. I still participated in sports, although on a girls' team when I was younger. And that was for me a difficult time in certain ways, but I also understand that sports in general can have a really positive outcome on folks. It can also have a really negative outcome, right? If you're forced to be in a space where you're on a team that doesn't align with your gender identity, or you're told, you know what, you shouldn't be able to get a scholarship, or you shouldn't be able to participate, because our entire system is set up to really disenfranchise and target and discriminate against trans folks, right? If we look at all of the different laws and legislation and everything else, and not only have we not really been thought of in the past, we are now being targeted, right? So the conversations I tend to have is I try to pull that conversation away from the maybe one example of a swimmer or one example of one person, and bring it back to, like, what are the positive factors of allowing trans folks to have groups of friends, to play on their teams that identify and align with their gender identity or expression, and trying to create spaces for them instead of trying to regulate our bodies and continue to other us. So that's what I'll say in a general nutshell. There are a lot of really good kind of tools around having that conversation. And I like this question, because I think it's really important for folks who, especially our allies of trans folks, to be able to think through some of this stuff, because like I've said, I've been able to change the minds of several close people to me on what their initial opinion was on this. And without going down kind of the medical rabbit hole on it, you don't even need to do that in order to reframe the conversation.
Thank you, Cato. There's been a couple comments thanking you for that and insightful and thoughtful response to that. So I appreciate that. I just want to, do a time check here. It is 11:35 according to my clock. The panel it does go until 11:45. So I just wanted to remind everybody we're about to wrap up, but I see that there's just a couple more questions to get through here, and then we will be finishing up. But just real quick. The next question on the list was, do you work with any communities and families that speak other languages?
So I can speak to this. So here at 1 in 10, we are very diverse staff, and we, as a lot of companies do, we have staff on who do speak more than one language. We have even appointed some staff to specialize in working with communities, especially our Spanish-speaking communities, and making sure we're connected with their community agencies, providing a lot of our services, even our flyers in Spanish, so that parents who may not be familiar with us, who may majority speak their first tongue in Spanish, can understand what we're about, and then also providing maybe a supplemental parent group or even presentation and programs in those spaces, so that they are understanding what they could then connect their youth to, so they can be supportive in the best way they can. So as of right now, we do have staff appointed specifically for Spanish-speaking communities and agencies. Yeah, so that's one of our aims, and as we continue to grow in staff and and knowing their abilities and the languages they speak, we may have others to offer as well.
Thank you, Aaron.
We also do have many therapists that
Yeah.
speak Spanish. I also speak Spanish. And I know some colleagues at a different agency that are fluent in ASL. So, and they are also very good allies that I would definitely feel very comfortable transferring or recommending children to those spaces.
Thank you. So we're going to get to the next question real quick. It's how do we help elementary school youth when their parents may be resistant to them learning about the existence of an LGBTQ community at their age? I've heard parents say that their kids are too young to know about this. Is there an age limit to education?
I think the biggest thing for me is just thinking back to my nephew. I don't care how young they are, it's being talked about with their friends and their schools. And so if you aren't a part of that conversation, then your young person, your child thinks that you're not inclusive. And so I think asking the questions, you know, I've asked my niece and nephew as young as when they were in kindergarten, do you have any non-binary friends at school? Do you have anybody that uses they, them pronouns? Do you know any trans youth at school? And the answer was yes to all of those. And they were like, and my niece, when she was in 4th grade, I believe it was, she was like, you know, this is my friend, they're non-binary and identify as pansexual. And it's like, she already knew what all that means. It's not a big deal to her. So if we're not talking about it in the home, it's sending the wrong message to your children.
And I would add that I just think about when I was in elementary school and I was teased for being gay as early as elementary school. So it's being discussed, it's being talked about, and that was a long time ago. I'll just say that. So I think there's this notion, sometimes the parent has a notion of what they may be exposing their youth or young child to, but they don't realize that once again, they spend 8 hours a day at school, and that's a lot of influence from a lot of other households where the children are coming and discussing and talking about things and sharing things. So yeah, so in regards to how to support the child, obviously we don't, you know, overrule a parent and kind of intrude, but if we have the opportunity to talk to the parent and normalize the conversation and just as much as you know, parents are enforcing gender stereotypes with clothing and things of that nature, we can, you know, if you're already saying those things when you're young, when they're younger, then they can have the same conversations and actually normalize or debunk that kind of by the attitude about just only having 2 genders and having specifics and things of that nature. So I think honestly it boils down to the re-education of the parents and the adults in the situation. Unfortunately, the children are just being deeply affected by it. So
if I could just add one thing briefly, you know, one of the things I talk to parents about a lot, and especially in our trainings when we talk to community members, is you know, we weren't taught a lot of this, right? For most of us, especially even now in school, our young folks aren't taught, at least in our state, right, about LGBT history in the community. And neither were parents or families or anything like that. So one of the things I would look at is like trying to create a space where folks can ask questions to me when I'm in the, you know, space to be ready to hold that space for folks, is being able to ask questions and coming in with a framework of, okay, you weren't taught this stuff and you're not a part of the community. So let's break it down and talk about it. And really, in a way, creating a space for parents or folks who want to learn better to be able to ask questions, because folks tend to be really worried, right? That they're going to ask a question that's going to offend somebody or they're going to say something in the wrong way. And if they don't have the education, Google is not always the best answer. If you're not looking in the, kind of like Bianca said earlier, if you're not looking in the right space. But creating that space is really helpful in being able to remind folks that everybody has a gender identity, whether you're conscious of it or not. Everybody has a gender expression. Everybody has a sexual orientation or maybe asexual, right? That it's not something that just the LGBT community has these identities. Just because we have a lot of language for them doesn't mean that folks who are cisgender and heterosexual don't also have those identities. And that's a way that I've found in talking to folks, whether it's corporate groups or parents, has really worked, is trying to have folks kind of self-focus on themselves. Like, oh yeah, you know what? I do identify as a woman and I do wear pants. And maybe 100 years ago, that would have been seen as not okay. And having those conversations to kind of unlearn and also learn.
So I believe that we had one more question in here. I want to acknowledge my friend works in professional baseball and it is very homophobic and transphobic. I just want to address that at 1 in 10, we do work closely with Major League Sports in creating an inclusive space. So that is work that we are continuously doing, although that homophobia and transphobia still exists in the world everywhere. But I do want to get to Kim real quick, if we could just take the last 2 minutes and respond to the last question. It says, with regards to asking pronouns, one major challenge I face is making sure everyone feels represented and not offended, and not offend those clients while at the same time not offering those who have different beliefs. My agency serves clients from 5 to 72 years old from all walks of life, and each have their own belief. I recently asked a client for their pronouns and he berated me for doing and ultimately left our agency. While this information is on our assessment, we don't always have the assessment in front of us. How would you recommend handling similar situations?
I would just say, if someone's offended by it, I would say, I'm so sorry that you feel offended by this, but we have clients or patients that this is incredibly important to. And if we don't get this right, it means that they will stop accessing healthcare or whatever the services are here, if they're not treated with respect. And here at 1 in 10, or whatever the organization's name is, we believe in treating everybody with respect. And I hope that you can find that in me asking you that question.
Yeah,
and then if they leave, maybe you didn't want that client anyway.
It would also probably be helpful to talk to your agency, if they're not already, of like, how do we standardize this and create policy around it, right? So that everyone in the organization is supported. And it could even be something like a sign by check-in, so all clients see, hey, we ask pronouns, this is why. Or it's something that's standardized so that there's something maybe visually up as well as verbally spoken, so folks know that we do this across the board. We're not only asking it to folks who we think, could be trans or could have pronouns we don't expect, but we ask everyone, and here's why. And making sure that the folks who are running the business or organization are standardizing that.
Thank you. So that takes us to 11:45. I want to thank everybody for attending the panel. I want to thank each of our panelists, Nate, Sam, Bianca, Cato, Aaron. Thank you so much for this thoughtful conversation. I hope all of the audience members learned something. If you have more questions or want to reach out to us, you can always reach out 1in10.org or get our information from our bios or someone else at the conference. So again, thank you all for attending, and hope to see you soon. Bye, y'all.